Hello everyone, my name is Sabah Faruqi and this is my presentation on personality and generations at work. So for the agenda today, I'm going to be talking about my personal personality type, as well as how to manage different personalities in the workplace, tips and tricks, and talking about different generations and their attributes, as well as challenges to having different generations in your workplace, as well as implementations of tips and tricks for the workplace. So my personality type is the ISFJ type. And I, for the most part, agree with this assessment. I actually took it in high school and it used to be INFJ. So now it's changed to ISFJ. I would say I am pretty introverted for the most part. I always want to say that I am pretty extroverted, but whenever I talk to people, they all typically think I am really quiet. Um, and I would say I'm more on the observant side, as well as friendly. I do go off of feelings as well, rather than um, logic, or I try to at least. And then scheduling, I do think I'm pretty rigid when it comes to scheduling. I like having agendas. I like having multiple planners and planning things out as much as I can. So I think that's fairly accurate to that. Um, in my personal life, I do obviously have different personality types, both in my family, as well as my friends, and of course in the workplace, you're always going to have different types of personalities. So my advice when dealing with different types of personality is always consideration and empathy. I have a few friends who are different than me and they are very extroverted, or they're very go with the flow. And so I think that I always try to remember we are different people, we like different things. And I think this is can apply to workplace as well. I knew a lot of people who like to do things a certain way, or didn't want to fall out of line with the old way of doing things, and that definitely created a strain in like my professional relationships. But ultimately, if you know how to work with it, you can avoid conflict in those ways. So always kind of going in with consideration and having empathy for people, just remembering they do things differently than I do, and trying to move forward in that way. So managing staff with different personalities, I think when you are able to know more about each and every individual staff, this can be a little bit hard in the beginning, but once you have a good relationship with them, I think it's important that you take their different personalities into considerations when you are assigning tasks. So, for example, someone who's very expressive and very extroverted is going to be better with short-term tasks, rather than because they're going to get bored with long-term tasks. Someone who's very probing is pretty flexible in their schedule, or they can be very flexible, and so they don't need they don't need hard rules in order to get their work done. Um, and tough-minded people, they're very task-oriented, so you can give them a list of things to do with deadlines. They would really work well in those kind of environments. So it's just different things to keep in mind when doing things like that. So different generations. I mostly picked boomers, millennials, and Gen Z to focus on. So boomers, I find that they are, or I was surprised to learn that they are very team-oriented people, and they prefer a more office scheduling, um, no flexibility when it comes to where their work is located. They really want to be in office, and that's a good thing to keep in mind with them, or not all of them, but just in general. With millennials, they really value personal relationships when it comes to the workplace. They're not really looking out for finance, but they do like a slightly flexible work structure with work and working from home or in office. Gen Z, they're similar in the sense that they like the flexibility of work from home. They really value and prioritize work-life balance. So in their jobs, they prefer it to be purposeful, and they are striving or they work for stability. So some challenges that you can face in the workplace, and I have also encountered, is definitely just miscommunication within generations. I think this could be a personality issue as well. Of course, one generation doesn't fit every stereotype, but I find that when I work with some people who are boomers or older millennials, that they can be a bit rigid in their workplace, and they'll really stick to the old rules and the old way of doing things, and find that if you kind of challenge that, that it doesn't really sit with them well. Um, and so I think that that's something to keep in mind. I usually try to go 50-50 with people and kind of meet them halfway. Maybe we can do part the old way and part the new way, and that would keep them happy. I also think that when you work with the younger people, they tend to, like for example, I work with a lot of teen volunteers, and they love to be on their phone. They, especially because they all work in a group, they want to talk with their friends, they want to play with the supplies that they're using, and that can definitely be frustrating, and that can definitely delay the progress in work. So I think the best way is to kind of keep some separation with them, and take and or also have like an authority figure watching down on them, making sure. I found that if someone older is even just like in the same room as them, just kind of close by, that they are more or less likely to act out. Um, Typically, in my situation, they're allowed to socialize, but it's like as long as you get your work done, that's fine. So, in that way, they're talking to each other, but they're not distracting one another to the point where none of the work is getting done. So, some implementations that I think people can use in their workplace are really understanding who your employees are. I think, of course, in any job, it depends on the type of job, but sometimes people can get too focused on what they're doing and not enough on who their employees are and who works for them, and the different types of people that they are. So, for example, I worked with someone who you really had to tell them every single step in order for them to really understand, and how and understand and finish their work correctly. Um, but I also knew people who you didn't really have to tell them much, and they could just kind of work at their own schedule, and they didn't really like being looked over their shoulder. And and that kind of ties into incorporating different types of work styles. So kind of like what I was saying previously, some people do like to be looked over the shoulder with every step, but other people like to just be kind of left alone and just do their work that way. I also think another way that people can have a more or better a better employee to employee relationship, or just good relationships in the workplace overall, is just meeting your employees halfway. I think if you let's say, for example, are a boss that really looks over people's shoulder and makes sure that every step is done correctly, maybe you can kind of do a 50% your way and then 50% the other way, which is just letting that person do their thing. And I think that that can make two people happy. It can make like your employer happy. It can make your employee happy. You both are kind of getting the thing that you want. And also, in that way, you can kind of practice different work styles and different implementations and see how they can work for you.